What's cracking, y'all? You are now watching Boo TV. Appreciate you for stopping in. Like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell, stay notified, and let's get into the topic for today. These Bron Goblins, super obnoxious LeBron James fanboys, have a thing they like to do. Well, to be honest, they have a lot of things they like to do, but a lot of it circles around the cesspool of revisionist history and trying to remove and make casuals believe that the very key players that contributed greatly to LeBron James's success did not exist or had little to no impact. One of those guys that's constantly getting disrespected is none other than Chris Bosh. Bosh, buddy boy, hear me out. I got your back here because not many people do. Here to put the truth on who the hell you were as a basketball player. How great of a player that you really were, despite even your reduced role behind James and Wade, as at least from a numbers perspective at a minimum. Now, all I ever hear is LeBron James and D Wade, with no mention of Chris Bosh. When they mention the top tier help LeBron had in Miami, they never mention Chris Bosh. Excuse me. Bron Goblins, clutch clients, LeBron himself. Was Chris Bosh not a member of the Heatles? Was Chris Bosh not up there on stage during that circus act in Miami? Was Chris Bosh not on stage when LeBron James was talking about not one, not two, not three, not four? Was Chris Bosh not the extremely pivotal stretch 4, stretch 5 piece that did so much for Miami Heat penetration and the offense? Excuse me. Chris Bosh was a very underrated and skilled player at his position, usually power forward or center. Bosh had an okay post game, great hands, had a great touch, adequate footwork, had a sweet jump shot in the mid-range, and could shoot from distance as well. With that being said, Bosh was exceptional at spreading the floor, especially when being guarded by centers. Bosh could score off pin downs, off ball, and in isolation. Bosh was not a great defensive player, but he wasn't horrible defensively either. I remember when I first started noticing Bosh, when he really started blooming, I was like, damn, he reminded me of KG a bit offensively, an offensive skill set to a degree. But he wasn't nearly the beast KG was on defense, intensity, or even passing a rock for that matter. Before Chris Bosh went to Miami that summer to join D Wade, followed by LeBron James, Bosh was a Toronto Raptor. You know, a lot of you Bron Goblins, you only been following LeBron, you know, from maybe like the Miami Heat days on forward and really don't know anything about what happened prior to that outside of looking at numbers and box scores and statistics. But just so you know, Bosh was originally a Toronto Raptor. He was drafted by the Raptors. Drafted 4th in the 2003 NBA draft with the other notable future Hall of Famers, Carmelo Anthony, Dwayne Wade, LeBron, so on. One of the best draft classes in the history of the NBA. Do you guys know while in Toronto, Bosh was an all-star by his 3rd year with that franchise? Bosh was a 5-time consecutive all-star and only getting better each year in Toronto. That's all on his own strength as the undisputed best player on the franchise. Just a side note, Bosh in total would be an 11-time consecutive all-star in his career. Bosh even won gold with them boys back in 2008, believe it or not. He was on that Olympic squad. Bosh took the torch from Vince Carter as the face of the franchise. And after he left, after Chris Bosh left, he was the all-time leader in points, rebounds, blocks, and minutes played. That was no longer Vince Carter. The first year that Chris Bosh made an all-star team, Bosh would suffer a season-ending injury post-all-star break. And the Raptors plummeted, going 1-10 in their next 11 games, which says a lot about Bosh's value to the basketball club. No worries, though. No worries. Bosh would bounce back in the 06-07 season with a career high in points, 22.6, and rebounds, 10.7, averaging a double-double on the season to lead the Raptors to their first playoff appearance in 5 years and their first division title ever. The Toronto Raptors finished third in the Eastern Conference due to their division title with a better record than even Dwayne Wade, who led the Miami Heat. The Raptors had a better record than the D. Wade-led Heat. Yes, believe it or not. The season after that, they made the playoffs again as a 6th seed, just a few games behind LeBron James and the Cavaliers. Now, the Raptors failed to make the playoffs the next 2 seasons, and a big reason for missing the playoffs in the latter is in the 09-10 season, Chris Bosh suffered an injury in which we saw a team that was 6 games over 500, and they were thriving, plummet out of the playoffs, with Chris Bosh's injury being a main contributing factor to that. That last season Chris Bosh had in Toronto, Bosh would be in his prime, and he hit a career high in points and rebounds with 24 whopping points per game and almost 11 whopping rebounds per game. He shot over 50% from the field, 36% from three-point land, and almost 80% from the charity stripe. Efficient, accurate. At this time, Bosh was a premier player in the NBA and arguably somewhere in the top 10 and unquestionably top 13 in the league during that time. LeBron and Wade were 2 of the top 3 players in the entire NBA, and they were the top 2 players in the Eastern Conference. Chris Bosh was right there behind them somewhere in the Eastern Conference, depending on where you want to put Dwight Howard and Derrick Rose. Rose had his big MVP year, made that major leap in that first year the Heat played together. So Bosh's numbers slipped because of the reduced role. But numbers aside, Rose was the better player that first year Bosh played in Miami. At that time, Chris Bosh had already surpassed Kevin Garnett at that position, despite the Skip Bayless narratives about Chris Bosh. I'm going to tell you right here, right now. I'm going to tell you right here, keep it 100. That Miami Heat ball club during that Heatles run does not sniff an NBA championship without Chris Bosh and his contributions and what he meant to that ball club as the 3rd best player on the team. And you could even make an argument for Bosh as being the 1st or 2nd most important or most valuable player when it comes to how he locks everyone in a more fluid offense with his abilities. Chris Bosh, as a mid-range and distance shooter, a shooting threat, made it much more comfortable for LeBron and Wade to make their slashes and cuts and finishes at the basket, with the shot blocking threats being somewhat out of position or out of position entirely. There was a time during their tenure when Bosh felt underappreciated, and he spoke out publicly about how he felt he should get more touches and the offensive sets should go through him more because the tape and the numbers support the team being better offensively when Bosh was more engaged and more of an offensive focal point. And it really makes sense. But of course, nobody wanted to hear that. The organization, the media, the fans, Brown Goblins, all told him to shut up and color, basically. The organization was basically like, Bosh, we understand your concern, but to put this delicately, Bron and Wade are the big dogs. They eat first. You fall in line in the pecking order. Continue to sacrifice your scoring, your numbers, and help us out in these other areas, off-ball action, etc. With that being said, in the first 3 years with the Miami Heat, inside of that 2-year title run especially, he was about 18 points per game, about 8 rebounds per game in a reduced role. But his contributions go further than numbers. Recently, 2 players that played on that Heat team spoke up and said Chris Bosh was the most valuable player on that team, and it was not LeBron James. Mike Miller and Udonis Haslem. Here's a quote from the podcast. Quote, "Everybody thinks that our most important player was Bron. Our most important player, not our best player, but our most important player was Bosh," Haslam said on the March 5th episode of the OGs. "Yeah, he was our most important player. Because if Bron went down, you could bring in D Wade. And it's not the same player, but you're going to get similar results of what you're going to get out of the player. Making plays, he can go for 30. But with Bosh, we couldn't simulate it. We didn't have another Chris Bosh. If he went down and he got hurt, we didn't have another one of those." And you know what? I absolutely agree. And this is a big reason why this Big Three super team, tipped the scales and distorted the competitive balance so much. One man down and another bona fide all-star just goes back into a role from which he's accustomed to. But especially Bosh, like they said, LeBron couldn't do what Bosh did. Wade couldn't do what Bosh did. How he affected spacing and the lanes. Furthermore, Bosh was like Kevin Durant, in which his skill set allowed him to fit seamless with about any player in any offense and not take anything away from other players in the team. There were games where Wade and or LeBron James were out and Bosh stepped in and led the Heat to victories. One particular game in 2012 with Wade out and LeBron James was sick, Bosh led the team with his typical all-star numbers that he was used to in Toronto. Bosh had 16 first half points and finished with 24 on 9 for 11 shooting, go along with 9 rebounds, 3 assists, and 2 block shots. And LeBron James said himself out of his own mouth, quote, "He's such an impact to our team, so efficient. He gets his points so quietly, makes jump shots, gets to the free throw line, makes things happen for our team, and we all fed off that. And I tried to feed off that as well." Same game, Coach Spo, acknowledging that it took several minutes before anyone even mentioned Bosh's name in the post-game presser, said this about Chris Bosh. Quote, "He's our best player. He's our most important player. And he's as steady and consistent as he's always been for the last 2.5 years. He makes it look easy, he makes it look quiet. And yet he's so impactful in the game. He was big under the rim, and not just the scoring, but the big plays defensively at the end." Let me ask y'all this. Y'all remember in the playoffs, I believe it was the 2012 playoffs, Miami Heat versus the Indiana Pacers, second round. The Indiana bigs, specifically Roy Hibbert, giving Miami Heat troubles in the interior, both ends of the floor. But Chris Bosh's skill set and his outside shooting really helped alleviate some of those issues by drawing Roy Hibbert further and further and further away from the basket, giving LeBron, Wade, and other slashers more mobility and easier opportunities to score. No shot blockers at the rim. Then, in that first game, Chris Bosh suffered an abdominal strain. And then there was speculation that he would miss the entire second round and possibly the remainder of the postseason. All of a sudden, with Bosh out, the headlines were now, the Heat are in major trouble without Chris Bosh. How will they offset the Pacers' interior D without the spacing Bosh creates? A lot of people started saying, I'm not so sure about the Heat anymore without Chris Bosh. But now all of a sudden, when the man goes out, you start to see their value. You didn't know what you had till it was gone, huh? Or you did know what you had, you just didn't want to talk about it because you wanted to elevate a certain other player on the team. But of course, the media would course correct and so on and so forth and say, oh no, there's no Chris Bosh, because that gives them the excuse for LeBron if they do lose. Before, Bosh was a nobody. But when it comes to planting excuses, the narrative flips. Now, Chris Bosh would only go on to play one game in that series, that first game, and the next 2 games, his absence was felt in 2 losses. And going into game 4, At Indy, the Heat were in trouble of going down in the series 3-1. Now, lucky for them, Dwayne Wade and LeBron James just started going berserk and, started asserting themselves. And lucky for them, they were hitting and, were able to get Miami Heat out of that hole or the potential deeper hole and wrap the series up in 6 against that young Pacers squad. Lucky for them. Folks, I could go on all day talking about Chris Bosh's value. But everything I said to you is pure facts. You can fact check me on everything. Go ahead. This isn't so much an opinion as it is facts. Y'all need to stop doing this. Chris Bosh was an all-star. Chris Bosh was one of the best players in the world. Chris Bosh had a lot to do with the Miami Heat's success during that run. There was a big three of LeBron James, Dwayne Wade, and Chris Bosh. Stop trying to erase this man from that piece of history. Stop trying to diminish his value to prop up LeBron James. It's disgusting. Take care, y'all. I appreciate y'all for stepping in. Chris Bosh, I got your back here. We see this happen a lot with a lot of people that play with LeBron James. But right here on Boo TV, we ain't going to let this narrative keep being pumped out to everybody. These are the facts. Check out our LeBron James playlist. Shout out to Chris Bosh. And I catch y'all on the next one. We out, baby.